in my journey is each person has their own breed, right? And a warrior, Kshatriya, is a warrior class. And I asked the shaman one time, I said, was I anything else besides this? Warrior? And he said,
Awesome.
to me, he said, I don't think you understand. You're like, it's like a breed of dog, like a German Shepherd, Pit Bull. You're warrior. And that's your karma. That's your dharma within this universe.
And I would like to welcome to the show, Tu Lam. How you doing, Tu?
Hello, how's it going, Alex?
Thank you so much for coming on the show, brother. I'm such a fan of your work, your journey, man, what you're doing in the world, what you've gone through, man. You are the definition of tenacity and just not stopping, man, no matter what. So I appreciate you coming on, man. I'm looking forward to talking about not only your journeys through life, but your spiritual journey as well, which is I have a feeling is going to be pretty intense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and you and we were just talking before. You've been watching the show, and you actually, you shocked me, by the way, when you said that. I was like, I can't believe you actually watched the show and you're a fan of the show. So I appreciate that, man.
Oh, huge fan of the show. I'm a big fan of yours, Alex. And you put together the puzzle, man, and I feel like religion and spirituality is a part of the puzzle, and you kind of bring it all together, right? Because each part of the world, we bring it all together. And you did a great job in that.
Oh, I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate that. So let's take it to the beginning, man. Your childhood in Vietnam. Can you talk a little bit about what you went through? Because I want to set the stage for the
Mhm.
journey, and the best place to start is at the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning, 0 to 7 is the program. That's
Yeah.
when your subconscious get programmed. My 0 to 7 was war. I was a child born in war. In fact, my mother shielded my body from incoming artillery fire the morning of my birth. Um, I was on the losing side of the war, Vietnam Wars. So American troops left Vietnam at that portion, and I lost my freedoms and country after a few months old. We lived underneath communist oppression. At 3 years old, we escaped on a wooden fishing boat. Now, I want to tell you, Alex, there's an estimated 400,000 refugees die at sea.
Yeah.
And my mother loaded up on the bottom deck of a fishing boat, and we left Vietnam. And the reason why, she said that there's no way that my sons are going to grow up as communists, in this new ideal. So she was willing to risk it all. First, we had to escape the military guards that were patrolling the coast for fleeing refugees. Any refugee got caught, sent to the labor camps where you eventually die. Then the pirates from surrounding countries, they would these criminals would stop the boats. They would forcibly board the boats, kill the men, rape the women, enslave the children. And then the typhoon strength of the tropical storm in the South China Sea. So all these things were going against us, and somehow we navigated past all that. We made our way into Malaysia, where the Malaysian Coast Guard stopped us at gunpoint. They later on that night, they separated the rich group from the poor group. I was the poor group, and we were loaded back up on the boats. And under the cover of darkness, they pulled us back out into the South China Sea. When day finally broke, when there's no more sight of land, they shot the motor, cut the line. They left us there to die. My mother said we drifted for nearly 30 days. Lack of food and water. Dad was thrown overboard. Somehow we got caught up in a huge tropical storm. Now, I want you to imagine a fishing boat in a huge tropical storm. She said that there's a miracle that our boat didn't capsize, you know,
Yeah.
and somehow the storm washed us further and further out into the South China Sea, where we were eventually saved by a passing Russian supply boat. And I tell you, man, like, that's a God story.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
there's no doubt about it. I mean, listen, my people, I'm Cuban, so I was born in the U.S., but many of my relatives were not. and they went through nothing as horrific as that, but many of my relatives did come over on boats, escaping at through the night from the communist in
Yeah.
Cuba. And well, I'm getting like chills just thinking about it, because I know a lot of my family, a lot of my friends back in Miami had gone through that, especially of a certain generation. And the stories you hear are the ones that you hear made it. So that means that they made it. That's a miracle in itself. But what you're talking about, I mean, that's absolutely guardian angel kind of world, brother. Because I mean, there's no reason why you should be alive, man.
Purpose.
Wow.
Purpose. There was a higher purpose. I didn't know at the time. So, we drifted out at sea, and then we got rescued by a Russian supply boat. Now, I want to tell you, Russian supply boat, like Russian, they're the one
Right.
who took us out of our country, right? But
Right.
they chose humanity, and they saved us, and they brought us to one of the refugee camps in Indonesia, where, eventually my parents and I, we spent a year and a half in these refugee camps. Now, in these refugee camps, thousands have died of disease, starvation. It's just a plot of land in the jungle, man. And then, after a year and a half, when we finally made it here to the land of the free, we're spit on, flicked off. We're called by many racist names. The Vietnam War was not popular, and you grew up, we seem like we're the same age. We grew up in the 80s, and it was racist times in the 80s,
Ooh.
especially after the Vietnam War. I was raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina, right outside of Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg is the home of the Special Forces. That's the training ground. Now, why I said that it's purpose, because I want to line the stars up for you. So first I survived that, the escape, and then I survived the refugee camps. We move over to the States, facing racism, poverty. Eventually, my parents got divorced when I was 7. And then my mother remarried to American Special Forces Green Beret. So at 8 years old, I was indoctrinated into a very strict military lifestyle. My uncle was American Special Forces Green Beret officer, and he's the one who did the paperwork for us to get out of refugee camps. He married my aunt when he was fighting the war in Vietnam, and Special Forces, they saw a lot of stuff there, right? So when I went to Fayetteville, I saw the post-Vietnam war years, like the PTSD. I saw it because I was raised around that life, the Special Forces. And, for me in the 80s, man, I didn't have very much friends, I was picked on. They called me all sorts of racist names. War movies were really big in the 80s, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
Well, that gave them, my peers the green light to call me by every source of racist name, because it was the Vietnam War movies, So I had to
Sure.
deal with all that, man, and I grew up around the Special Forces training ground. And I tell you, man, like in the 80s, Kung Fu Theater, remember that? Like the
Oh,
ninja
dude, Sunday afternoons, bro. Are you kidding? Yeah, I would watch Kung Fu, yeah, with the bad dubbing and stuff, Bruce Lee, all
That's
that
right.
stuff. Yeah.
That's right.
And even Kung Fu theaters. I mean, if you go to they would just theaters to just play Kung Fu movies all the time. People who weren't around in the 80s don't understand the wave that it was a wave from the 70s that came in of Kung Fu cinema in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and Bruce Lee was the one that kind of kicked the door down. Oh, dude,
Oh man,
it
I
was
love it. I know.
glorious times. Glorious
Well, I
times.
know you're in the movie industry, and so you can really respect that. So the ninjas. So as a
Oh,
child,
oh,
I
dude,
wanted to be a ninja.
who
That's all
didn't?
I wanted.
Who
Yes.
didn't? I had throwing stars. I did not do the nunchucks because I would have killed somebody, including myself. But I had throwing ninja. They had the throwing stars. Oh, they were for people to understand. In the 80s, I was in Florida, I think, in the 80s. By the movie theaters, they would have ninja stores where you could go buy nunchucks, swords, throwing stars, all that kind of stuff. And the whole store was just that back in the day. Can you imagine?
No, I remember, man, like 9 years old, I was introduced to the ninjas. And at 9 years old, I was introduced to Bushido,
Yes.
the way of the warrior. right? The
Yeah.
ancient code of ethics of the samurai. And for those people that don't know what Bushido means, there's 7 virtues of Bushido, compassion, duty, honor, respect, loyalty, justice, courage, all the pillars, the core values, and
Mhm.
very Confucius in the warrior based,
Mhm.
samurais. I didn't know any of that back then, but that led me to the Bushido code. And I didn't know the strength of, like, I didn't know the depth of Bushido, at that time. So at 13, look, man, 13, I was being picked on. It was racist times. I was this small little Asian refugee boy, picked on a
Mhm.
lot, and I didn't have very much friends. So my brother and I, we would go to the local library, and my brother became a doctor, so he naturally graduated towards the doctor books. But man, I want to be a ninja, right? So I started reading about Bushido, and believe it or not, that led me to the Tao Te Ching
Yeah.
at a very young age.
Ooh.
Very young age. When I say young age, 13 was when I first saw the Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu.
Yeah.
Put it all together, right? And I truly feel like God puts things in front of us. There's a certain path, right?
Mhm.
And for me, it was a warrior's path because I saw the warrior at 9. I wanted to be one. 13, I saw a deeper meaning in the warrior as Confucius and Lao Tzu. And there's a I don't know if you know the caste system. It's a
Yeah.
Hindu system. Okay.
Of
So
course. Of course.
you had God, you have the king, the priest, and you got the warrior class that protects the Burma, which is the king.
Mhm.
So I was introduced to that, at a very young age. Didn't put it all together. Didn't put it
Sure.
all together, right? And all I knew is I wanted to be a ninja. And at 13, I started getting interested in what my uncle and stepfather did, special forces. The
Mm.
Panama War was happening during that time frame in the 80s, right?
Mhm.
I was starting to become a teenager. I was reading these special operations manuals that I would see laying around the house, right? About how to put up a Claymore anti-tank weapon. I would read about it as a teenager because my stepfather was learning some of that stuff, right? And he had to bring it home and to study that. So I would dab into it, and I would say around 13, I realized the Special Forces mission was so the Special Forces motto is De Oppressa Librare. Translated in Latin, it means to free the oppressed. So the Army would send Green Berets all around the world to fight for the people that can't fight for themselves, for fight for the oppressed, to fight for the very people that were my parents,
Mhm.
the people that were born out of the insurgency, all the
Mhm.
children, all the lives lost. Who's going to protect them? Green Berets.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
knew that. So at 16, I started training. High school, I would run long distance run, started to get my body strong, and then at
Hey,
18.
so too, before you continue, I don't want you to go too far because I want to go back for a second. During the time that you were coming up, man, and going through the hell that you were going through and survived, what part did spirituality play, if any, at your life at that point? Was there a God? Were you angry at that God? What was going on? Because I could only imagine at that age, I would have been livid. I would have been like, screw you. How could you do this to me? How can you? I've seen so much. Like, what was that like in those early years?
Man, like my mother was Buddhist, and she wouldn't practice Buddhism. She would practice ancestral honor. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And my stepfather, I didn't see anything. So I wasn't raised around God, the Bible. I didn't know any of it. In fact, there was a cartoon called Superbook back in the day, and these kids will
mhm.
read this. They'll get stuck out, and it's raining, so they have to stay inside. It's a cartoon. They stay inside, and they had a robot, and then they'll open up Superbook, which is the Bible, and then they'll go into the book, right? And they
Right.
actually lived and met Jesus and all that. That was my only glimpse of religion, but I also thought
Mhm.
it was a fairy tale.
Right, but it wasn't spiritual though. It wasn't even in the Buddhist. You weren't going down Buddha's path or Buddhist way. So you were so it barely even was part of your life at that point.
The only thing I felt, if I remember my childhood, was, man, I just wanted to be accepted.
I feel like most of us.
Yeah,
Like most
right.
of us, man. Like
Yeah,
all of us wanted to be accepted, man.
I never felt accepted as a child, and it got to a point where I didn't need to be accepted.
Mm.
So I walked my path as a warrior. Um,
Okay.
16, I started my training. I was reading. I would say in high school, I was reading The Art of War by Sun
Mm-hmm.
Tzu. I was reading about the 47 Ronins. I read Bushido. So very warrior, you know.
Five Rings. Did you read Five Rings too?
Book of Five Rings at 13.
Jesus, dude, man.
Mhm.
13. I was watching Saturday morning cartoons.
You
A
know,
whole other
tell you,
different path, brother.
but Alex, I tell you, man, I didn't understand any of it. Why are you comparing a warrior to a merchant and a farmer? Now I
Right,
understand.
right.
Now I get it.
Sure, sure.
But back at 13, I don't understand it. And but it led me down a warrior's path. I knew that special forces was my ticket. I knew if I made it through that training, which high nutrition rate, I knew if I made it through, I can go back to those third world countries. I could fight. I could fight for those oppressed.
Mm.
And I knew that, but it wasn't compassion there. I couldn't say that I wanted to go back and fight for the people for compassion, because I wasn't that great of a child back then. I was living in I was asleep. I was living in my trauma, and I wanted war.
You were angry.
So
Anger.
very angry, very
Yeah, of
angry.
course. Of course.
18, I joined the army. I started my career with the paratrooper infantry. Then I made my way into amphibious long range reconnaissance teams. Tried out for the special forces, and at 21, I was a special forces Green Beret on the A team for deploy Okinawa, Japan.
At
Yeah,
21? Wow,
21.
man.
Yeah, I knew what I wanted. And in Japan, what a better way to learn Bushido, the way of the warrior,
Yeah,
right?
man.
So I
Yeah.
fought. I fought in underground matches. I fought in cage matches. Back when UFC started coming out, you started unfolding in the Marine Corps bases and stuff. So I'll go fight in tough man matches in Marine Corps base. I just had something to prove, Alex.
Yeah, man.
Man, like I had something to prove, and I felt like I didn't belong. And I knew like I just had this rage in me. I couldn't control it. So I got to the teams, and I'm kicking doors, blow up stuff, shoot, free fall. You're doing all the spec ops stuff, and that wasn't even good enough for me. So I bowed into a dojo, and I would fight on the weekends. And being in the military, the army owns you, so they spend millions of dollars training you, so they don't want you to get hurt on a cage match. So I fought like underground.
So you're basically stating the plot of Bloodsport, essentially, right now.
not
you
not
you are
quite that level.
you're Frank Dukes, and then you got the military guys chasing you like, we spent a lot of money. Uncle Sam spent a lot of money on you, boy. We can't have you hurting yourself in this kumite.
Yeah, yeah. And I was part of a counter-terrorist unit back then. So, I was training for this one fight. It was a big, big, big match. And my pager went off. We flew into Malaysia. We did a counter-terrorist mission. We were in the jungles for 30 days. And I flew back 3 days later. I fought. I had jungle rot. I had sickness. I had diarrhea, and I still fought. I lost. But I'm telling you that because I wasn't right in the head.
No.
Like I had something to prove, and it's not good, looking back. So I 9/11 happened.
Oh,
You know,
jeez.
I had 3 years on the A teams before 9/11 happened, and then the global war, and I fought the rest of my whole career. So 15 years of war. I've been around the world. I'm very vague about my military just because I served at a very tier 1 level. Tier 1 is, the top of, so you have SEAL Team 6, you have the unit, and I was part of the Army top tier. And, during the war, I traveled around the world hunting down some of the world's most wanted men. We would live in safe houses. I would work with this agency to find, fix, locate, and kill. Um, every continent you can think of,
Yeah.
I worked in. And at the end of my time, at the end of my time, the anxiety started catching up with me, the survival. You can't live in survival for so long, you know?
Yeah.
And I was living survival, and not just in the army, I was living in survival since a child, you know? Um, I started losing my way. I would numb my emotions with painkillers. I found like in the euphoric of that drug, it takes me away from the realities of war, loss, everything. So the tail end of my career, I was fighting the counter poaching wars in Cameroon, Africa. Poachers would come in, kill, well, terrorists would pay poachers to come in and kill wildlife to fund their terrorist camps, and they'll kidnap women and children and sell them into the human trafficking. Just shit that I saw my whole career, and at that point, man, I was stuck in emotions. I wasn't present anymore. Anxieties all the time, barely holding a marriage together, drug addict. So I retired at 23 years of service, 15 years of war in 27 countries. And I tell you, I retired as a decorated Green Beret, but man, I had no purpose. I had no purpose. And
Let me ask you this, man. Because I've talked on the show a lot, and if you've seen the show, I talk about the first 7 years, the programming that we get in our subconscious, and then the program doesn't stop at 7; it continues throughout. But that's the most potent time. So in that first 7 years, man, you got some hell of some subconscious programming. Then add in all of the other stuff that you had to deal with for the next 23 years. And I talk about reprogramming ourselves, and dealing with our traumas and stuff like that. Brother, man, how did you even begin to start to reprogram yourself, to acknowledge that you even had a program for when you discovered you had a program that you were
yeah.
playing in the background, and then to begin to unravel this, because man, those are hard edged grooves in the brain, man. How did you even begin to do that?
So after my retirement, I was sitting around in a dark house watching TVs off. I would hear the noise of the world. Like literally, I would hear the world over and over. And thoughts is tied to emotions, and I was feeling it right here in my solar plexus. And man, one day I heard a voice louder than any other voice. And he told me to get up. And I did. I got up and I walked around my dark house. And I got this room called my war room. And it's 27 countries of me living and running with rebels and captured flags from different countries and just spec op stuff, my war room. Along with that is a collection of samurai books all around the world. And I have swords, I have every armor.
Mhm.
And somehow, I ended up there in front of the ancient writings of a Ronin, Musashi.
Mhm.
And Musashi, at that point, I was looking for the answers everywhere else. I went around the world looking for the answer.
Mhm.
And Musashi said, the answer is within everything.
Mhm.
The Book of Five Rings, right? 13, I try to read it now. After war, it takes a whole different meaning.
Ooh.
So, Bushido, the way of the warrior, it has virtues and courages.
Mhm.
It's one of the primaries. So, I mustered up much courage I could. I dumped the painkillers and I suffered. I suffered for months, man. Vomiting, stomach cramps, dude, anxieties through the roof because I didn't have anything to hold me back from that anymore. I put a barrier in
Mhm.
between uh, 15 years of war, right?
Mhm.
And then now that barrier's gone. I heard it. I heard it all. I felt it all.
If you're enjoying this conversation, I invite you to go deeper down the rabbit hole with me on Next Level Soul TV. It's packed with exclusive content like live special guest Q&As, daily podcasts, commercial-free access to the entire Next Level Soul catalog, early access to episodes before they air, and special meditations you won't find anywhere else. We will be adding new exclusive content every month, plus you can connect with me during my monthly live streams. Just go to nextlevelsoul.com/subscribe and join our soulful community today. I'll see you on the inside.
And I started getting into meditation. I would Google. So Green Berets are really smart at intelligence, right? So one of the things we have to do is we have to be really intelligent soldiers. So, open source research, closed source research. So I do a lot of research, and meditation kept on popping. I know that was the Eastern practice, and I want to explain this. During my time in the Special Forces, I've been around the world, and the Green Berets, we don't live on a military base. We live with the people. So I'm in the villages with the people, and some of these villages has no electricity running, so very primitive. In Malaysia, we're hunting down boars with spears and torches. Like, that's how primal we're going, And I want to explain this to you. There were certain practices that I saw that I never understood. Like in Africa, we would walk through village and village, and I'm working with the Cameroon commandos, and they'll go to some of these primitive villages, and they'll link up with the shaman, and they'll go off in their distance. I could hear screaming, and I know they're doing a ceremony, and I thought it was back then, I thought it was just witchcraft or whatever. But man, after I got out of the Army, I started I started putting together these practices, right? And I started meditating and mindfulness, so really aware of my thoughts, and I started journaling, and and I started picking up all this because I just did research online. I'm like, oh, that seems like it works, right? And sometimes some things don't work. I would say that I have a very powerful morning routine that I developed. I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the reason why is your brain waves are slower, right? So in meditation, you're trying to slow down your brain waves, right, to get into your subconscious. Well, now I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not quite awake yet, and I go into meditation. I cold plunge like the monks would do. I have a cold plunge, 38 degrees. I'll cold plunge, wake up the brain, boot up the brain, and then I'll go into my deep breathing technique, which is very elongated breathing, inhale and exhale. I learned that by Indian yogis. And then, man, I would run on the treadmill. I run outside, and I'll listen to podcasts with two doctors talking about neuroscience. That's how it started. And that led me to you, right? Your podcast, and I tell you, I got really hooked on your podcast because, okay, so in war, you see people die all the time, and the soul does leave, like the moment, like if I touch my teammate that just died, I know his soul's not there anymore. I could feel it. There's something, and that's the thing about Warrior's Path is, man, you get such more insights and experience on life, right? Right. So you see the depth of that. And after I got out, man, like I needed to know where the soul goes after we die. Your podcast, like I think what you're really great at is you're putting together puzzles, your Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, meditation, energy, like, wow. Yes, right. And that's what drew me to you. So a lot of self-development during that time. And look, I failed at meditation 3 years. And people were like, wow, it took you that long? Yeah, I had a lot. 3 years. And the reason why I say 3 years is, man, there was times I cried out of meditation because it got worse. It was worse. I didn't
Because you
know
were
that
bringing it up.
emotions. I was bringing it up,
You were
right? I
bringing
didn't
it
know
up,
at the
dude.
time.
Yeah,
I
brother, you
didn't know
bringing
at the
it up.
time. So
Yeah,
I
man.
would do these deep breathing practices, and I would fail, and in my mind I was failing, right? But I'm very disciplined. Every day I would sit there, every single day, no matter if I feel like I'm failing. And it was one morning, I would say about 3 years into it, one morning I heard the birds. Birds always been there, but I actually heard it.
Yeah.
And I actually felt the temperature. And why this is important, because I was never that present. I'm always in my head. So then I realized that, then I started meditating. I started meditating more, and then I got a hold of mushrooms, right?
Oh.
Time to enhance the meditation now, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
my, in special operations, a lot of guys get out and they go down that psychedelic route, to heal. And I know, like, for me, meditation, I already had a practice of meditation. So I knew, like, psychedelics was going to enhance that. So first I prayed, and then I saged the area, and, just did the whole ceremony. And then I ate the shrooms. And man, I tell you, like, I never felt that love, right? Never felt that. And what came out was forgiveness. I wrote it down in my notebook.
Yeah.
Forgiveness. Out of 8 hours, right? I sat in this state of bliss, and what came out was forgiveness. So I forgave, man. I forgave the world for what I saw. I forgave, you know, all the shit I experienced. I forgave. It didn't work because I didn't forgive myself. That journey didn't start yet. So I was forgiving the world, and I was, I'm in the tactical industry, so we're very known in the industry.
Mhm.
The tactical industry is made up a lot of ex special operation guys, big gun companies, big tactical companies will hire guys like me to come in, give them advice. For me, I modeled guns, whatever. And we were really successful, and we're really successful in our company. We entrepreneur company. I take my ideas with my engineer team. We develop tactical gear now being utilized by our military. Very fast, Alex, like very fast in that. And then I got on History Channel. So when I say that, very fast in fame and wealth,
Yeah. Okay.
very fast. But man, I wasn't living in it. I
Yeah.
wasn't living in any of it. I was
Is
standing in
it
front of this crowd, in front of thousands of people and talking, and I wasn't living in it at all. I wasn't there.
so too when this fame and fortune started to come into your life, where were you in your meditation path, and had you already taken the mushrooms or not?
I have.
You
I
had. All
have.
right. So all of this was preparing you for these opportunities that came in, which are
Mhm.
intense. I've been around fame all my life. Not that I'm famous, but I've been around it a lot, and I've seen it firsthand. What happens? It ain't easy, and it ain't what it's all cracked up to be. That I know. And fortune, it only amplifies what you got. So if you're good, it's going to do a lot of good in your life. If you got stuff going on, it could destroy you. Is that kind of
Absolutely.
what you felt as well?
Yeah, I was just living anxieties. I wasn't living in the presentness. Like, I mean, everything was happening at once. Everything that I would say that I wanted in life as a child, man, it was unfolding in front of my face. And I
Mm.
felt like I wasn't worthy of any of it.
Oh, so
And
you
that's,
felt the worthiness was the thing that you were not worthy. You were like, I shouldn't be getting this. So you were dealing with that while this was all going on and still talking to thousands of people.
yeah. And I'm trying to, the thing about, special operations guys, we're great at putting on a show. I
Mm.
have to stand in front of a two-star general and brief, about some rebel force. Like, I have to be able to turn it on and off, and I can turn it on and off. I've been doing it for a long time. So in front of all the people, I turn it on. the
Right.
star, the fame, whatever, the motivation, whatever they want. I turn it
Mhm,
on.
mhm,
And then, but I don't live in it. And, there was a point where it got really bad.
mm.
Where I want to go with this is, your nervous system, once it gets taxed, right?
Oh.
You're living in survival now, and you're
Mhm,
not going to live. Like, you're not going to win this game. I don't care how tough you think you are. I'm a commando that been through a lot of stuff, and I was hurting, you know?
mhm,
So then, some of my Navy friends in special operations, they started going down to Mexico to start doing IBEGIN, which is from the Iboga root from Africa, knowledge, the tree of knowledge, right?
mhm,
So it's
mhm,
an MLA from the tree of knowledge from Africa. And then this is the most aggressive treatment in psychedelic that they offered in Mexico. Okay, so you do that, and what it does, it remaps your brain. And then they hit you with 5-MeO DMT, which is the toad, right? So very aggressive. I went down to Mexico, hurting. I sat with the medicine, 15 hours of anxieties is what I felt in the medicine. No visuals, nothing, just anxieties. The worst pain I ever felt. Heartbroken, anxieties, death, you name it. Um, I didn't think it worked, but it did, because that's as well as I do, that's energy moving, dude. Right.
mhm,
I just didn't know. I didn't know. Right. And it does remap your brain. So like for me, I get a lot of negative talk. Like I always, like for me, I talk very negative to myself, and I never
mhm.
knew why. I would tell you why later, but at this portion of the journey, I didn't know why. Right. And man, it worked, like it remapped my brain. I felt one, like I ran outside, I connected with earth again, and then the anxiety started happening. And then they hit me with 5-MeO DMT, which is that toad venom. Now
Mhm,
that is one of the most poisonous venom, that toad, right? So they pissed off a toad. The toad shoots his venom into a glass. They dry it, they flake it, and they put it into a crack pipe and you smoke it. And what it does, man, I don't know. Have you done that stuff?
I have never partaken, but I have spoken to many who have. It's just
Mm,
it is something that my sister, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't
good for
do,
you.
I've never done any drugs. I tried alcohol, my body rejected it. Someone gave me a cigarette at 5, thank God, and I coughed up a lung. It was the 70s, brother. So I was like, "Oh, you want to smoke? Here, give it a shot," just to screw with me. I took a puff, I was out. So I've never tried any of that stuff because it's something that it's not on my path. It's just something I don't need to do. I
Oh
get high
man.
on my own supply, as they say.
Oh man. You have a beautiful soul, man. Yeah.
Appreciate
So
that, man.
yeah. So I knew like where I was with the amount of trauma I was going through. Yeah, I needed that.
Mhm.
So I would say like the 5-MeO, man, it put down my ego. And my ego, man, it was bad. And I put him down, like it was gone. The ego. It left.
Yeah, yeah.
It left for a week. So I was living life without the ego. So I saw how life is without ego.
Uh-huh.
Man,
Oh, it's
it's
beautiful.
so freeing. It's so freeing. And then, one morning I was meditating and it came back. And it came back very angry. And I want to say this to people from what I heard was that, I try to kill my ego. Literally, I try to kill him. But when he came back, it was clear as day. Like my ego is my best friend. And the ego was forged when I was dying as a 3-year-old boy at sea. It was forged in to protect me in the villages and in the refugee camps where kids get murdered.
Mhm.
That ego was
Mhm.
there. Spec ops, That ego was
Mm-hmm.
there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
told me all this. And, I didn't know how to live with it. I didn't know. So, anyways, I continued to work on myself. So, 4 o'clock in the morning runs and um, meditation every single. Now I knew how to meditate, you know, and then I got to a certain point where it wasn't the externals. Look, I forgave the world. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't externals. It was me. So then I started deep diving within, and then that's when the whole universe unfolded. So when I say the whole universe unfolded, is man, I found God.
Mm-hmm. No, no, I understand. I understand. I
I
understand.
found God. Like when I say that, people are like, "Yeah, no, like, dude, I never had it. Like, I was left for dead. I was in like neglect as a child. Like, I never felt that, and I found it, and it's within me and you and everything. We're all one." Anyways, but the anxiety started happening, and then, it got really bad where the voices were telling me to harm myself. So I went down to Mexico and I sat with some cactus.
Mm.
What
Mm-hmm.
Wachuma is a masculine teacher, right? Versus ayahuasca, which is the vine from the Amazons, but that's a feminine uh, psychedelic. This one is a masculine psychedelic, so you literally can hear a man's voice because when the psychedelic energy is a spirit, it's a plant, it's a spirit, the energy, and it teaches you. So at that point, man, like that psychedelic, the Wachuma, and that's what the Native Americans use when their population is being wiped out. Generations of trauma. You believe me when I say, like, you're if your ancestors face trauma, you're already born with that.
Ancestral trauma, ancestral karma, and ancestral trauma that comes along with you. It's up to you to kind of deal with that. Yeah, you. Oh no, dude, I've had some clearings of some ancestral karma that you just bring along through your family, and some of it's really easy, like alcoholism. Not easy meaning, but like you could see it easily. Alcoholism, abuse. Those are very external stuff, but the internal stuff, the anger, the frustration. I mean, you could. Man, I was watching an interview with Sly Stallone yesterday actually, and he was talking about the abuse that he got when he was a child, and then he's like, I can't blame my parents because look where they came from. They were abused. So this was like, I'm not going to be happy. So you're not going to be happy. But then
Yeah.
he broke that cycle with his kids and he stopped it. It's very much, and I know you've seen this movie, The Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. It's very much like that. That's his generational karma and generational trauma that followed Bruce Lee and the whole Brandon Lee thing and everything. But in the movie, he had to defeat that
Yeah.
evil spirit or that evil thing to not hurt his kid. And that's
Mhm.
it's in going down the Chinese mythology. Man, again, it's all connected, brother. It's all connected. You go to India, you go to China, you go, in South America, all of this stuff is connected. But it's, yes, a long way to saying, yes, I understand exactly what you mean by generational karma and generational trauma, man.
Yeah, like the Vietnamese, right? Like, people look at the Vietnam War. Oh, it was only 8 years of war. No, there was an Indochina war. The French tried to colonize there. They're raping, killing, pillaging, like at that point. Like the war, like my mother was born in war. So my grandfather escaped the tyranny of communist China, like walked out of China. If he was caught, he would have been put into labor camps for the rest, until he dies. Those were the traumas that I was inherited with, like I was born with, along with my trauma of left for dead and everything else, refugee camps and racism and all of it, all of it. So what I want to say is that's why I had all those negative thoughts. That's why I put myself down all the time, and I never can live in it because I never felt like I deserve it because that's what the world gave me. That was my
Mm.
program. So it's now time to change the program.
So
So
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to ask you this, man, because this is something that I think will help a lot of people by you answering this. If you've listened to the show, you know about the soul blueprint. You know about the idea that we choose the life that we're going to walk into to teach us certain lessons. It's part of our karma, it's part of our lessons to learn, to experience the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you have that, and I know you do have this understanding, did you ever have to kind of reconcile that with what you've gone through? Because it's real easy to look at it from a very bird's eye view and go, oh, it's just lessons, man. You're just doing experience. That's really nice metaphysical, woo woo kind of stuff. But when you're in a boat, left for dead as a child, born into war, it takes on a whole other level of realism, because might talk that this is a simulation, that we're all avatars in a video game, and we're all in the Matrix, and we could do all that. But your program, brother, your game, the world that you walk down ain't for everybody. So if you believe that there is a soul blueprint, you chose this. How did you reconcile that is my question.
So because, I sat with my soul and I met my soul. And I tell you, like, the conversation I had with my soul was beautiful, because what a smart old soul he is. And an old soul over a young soul. An old soul, man, is willing to gamble. Is willing to gamble big, right? Do you think, Alex, that was a coincidence that I was born out of oppression and I was raised by the special forces to travel around the world to fight for the oppressed? Do you think like that was
luck?
Do you think that was luck?
Yeah.
Do you think it was luck that boat was, like we were saved when I was like, I feel that the soul makes a contract and we're here to evolve our consciousness to return home. Right. When I say return home, go back to return to God, and the old soul, they like to gamble. And, like when I say that is, dude, I mean, look at it. Like, I had to be oppressed. I had to face that in order for me to look at a village boy that lost his family to terrorists and have compassion, and willing to die for this village that I don't even know, to fight for those people, because, man, I was that. And God gave me that, gave me that experience so I could be something more. And when you say the soul, I do believe in that. I totally believe in that. And my life kind of shows it, if you really kind of dissect it.
And it actually built you, it did build you to who you are today. I mean, I've gone through some trauma in my life, my own dark night of the soul. You can't compare apples to apples with anybody's life journey. But without those hard times, without those moments in the fire, you wouldn't be hardened, or you wouldn't be tested in the way that you have been. And again, real easy to say it now that it's past. And every once in a while, when I got to deal with something, I'm like, man, I'm gotta learn something here. Damn it. But hopefully I've gone through most of the heavy stuff already, hopefully. But whatever does come down the path, it's there to teach us, it's there to hone us. And even if it's the most horrible thing that ever happened, which a lot of that happened in yours, when you have a moment to look back, you go, oh, yeah, without that, I wouldn't be, you wouldn't have that book behind you, The Way of the Ronin. Like that, if your mother would have not married a special forces guy, who knows? You might have just been throwing some Chinese stars in the backyard, brother.
That's right. I'll be a tech guy playing ninja at night.
Right. Watching American Ninja 4.
That's right.
Annihilation, and Bloodsport. And that would have been the end of it, but the path was laid out so beautifully.
So
and
beautiful.
It's been laid out so beautifully and horrifically at the same time, because and I've talked about my, I'm not even going to compare it, but when I almost when I got involved with the mob back in the day, making a movie, and I was traumatized for a year of having my life threatened on a daily basis from a psychopath, that gave me the empathy to do what I'm doing today. And I didn't see it for 20 odd years. Just like you didn't see a lot of the trauma that like a lot of the blessings, I guess, in your path until you went through all of this work. Is that fair to say?
Oh gosh, Alex, I went, now I'm a public speaker, right? So I get
Yeah.
asked to public speak a lot. And, I went to a high school, and,
Oh,
like high school is like the worst time in my whole life, right?
yeah.
And man, I just spoke my pain. I spoke it, and it helped so many kids, like they came running up to me. I'm a Call of Duty guy, so they're already a fan, but dude, like to have that impact, to take your pain and turn it into something more, like you're
Mhm.
transmuting that energy, right? And that's
Mhm.
how you heal. Like you can't get rid of energy, but you can transmute energy. And that goes to the old teachings of Kung Fu, you know.
Mm. Let me ask you, you mentioned the 47 Ronin. I think that's such a beautiful story, and not just a Keanu Reeves movie, but but such an amazing story. Can you tell the audience a little bit about it? Because it is a very famous story, and even if you vaguely heard about mythology or stories of the samurai, the 47 Ronin is one of those stories that you hear, besides the Seven Samurai, obviously, from Kurosawa. But can
Oh
you
man,
talk a little bit about
great
the
movie.
dude? It's one of my favorite movies of all time, bro. Come on, are you kidding? And you
Yes.
sit there and watch that? It's amazing.
So I want to put you in history. So over 250 years of civil war. Tokugawa Ieyasu was a shogun, so a bunch of daimyos fought for land. Tokugawa was able to, became the shogun, which is the military ruler next to the emperor. So at this point, it was a moment of peace. So these were the 47 Ronin were peacetime samurais. They never tasted war. Okay, and that
Mm.
this is why it's so important with this scene. So it happened almost like 100 years, after war stating periods. They forgot what it means to be a warrior, samurai, Bushido code, and then Takegawa was the shogun. Okay, so the whole story in 47. They had an etiquette instructor, and they had these daimyos. So daimyos were powerful warlords that owned their army of samurais. So this daimyo owned the 47 samurais. Okay, and he had to attend an etiquette class by Kira, which was he was very stuck up kind of guy, arrogant, but he had to teach this daimyo manners. And this daimyo, he was, they said that the 47 Ronin daimyo, they say he was kind of a country boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't have quite the etiquettes and he was trying to learn. And then finally, Kira made fun of him, called him a pig, right? And then pissed off the samurai. So he drew his sword on the council, which is a total no go. And before that night, they told him that he had to submit sabakyu, which is, to gut his belly,
Mm-hmm.
in to retain his honor. And for the viewers, if you lose your honor, your family lineage lose that land, they lose royalties, they lose everything. So it behooves you to rip your belly to save your honor, right? So the samurais were so loyal under the Bushido code that if a daimyo takes his life, that the samurais do the same to follow him on to death to protect him. But Takegawa Uesu didn't let him. So he gave him the most dishonorable status, which is Ronin. Ronin, masterless, right? Wonder. So they can't even hold a job, these guys, because they're the samurai class, they're unemployed, and they just wandered the world, right? Wandered Earth. And the Akira was afraid of his revenge, so he sent out spies to spy on 47 Ronins. Was actually 46, and they reported back that these samurais, these Ronins, lost their way. They're womenized and they're drinking. They're bums out in the street. They're nobody. Don't worry about them. But it was actually all it was all
A
freaking
ruse.
an
A
act.
ruse. Yeah.
Yeah, because they were actually conducting reconnaissance. I had to study this in the special forces. I actually write a thesis on it, where they had to, under the cover of, being a merchant, a farmer, whatever, a peasant, they were getting intelligence off the walls, the guard, the shift, and the mount of samurais that they had to have where Kira was actually at. So after a year of gathering intelligence, they came back for one night, did a plan, executed one of the most successful assaults in history. Literally,
Mhm.
uh, killed Kira, cut his head off, washed it, walked back to his daimyo's tomb, laid a head on the tomb of their daimyo in honor for their daimyo. And then Takagawa Ietsu caught word of it, and he sat on it for a month because he didn't know what to do, because these samurais did what they had. They did what the Bushido code said, right?
Right.
So the lesson of the story is nobody can take your honor but you.
Mhm.
Nobody. So then he granted the 46 samurais, the 47th one kept alive, the son was kept alive to tell the story. And in the spring, when the sakura was blooming, the 46 Ronin split their gut to join their
Mm.
daimyo. And that, man, that to me is just, that's warrior, it's very
Mm.
warrior.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable story, to say the least. Brother, with you, when you are, you've said that you've found God, you found source, you found an understanding, a clearing. I've spoken to a lot of people who've taken psychedelics, and I spoke to a yogi once, and
Yeah.
I asked, this is such a beautiful, I like the way he says it. I don't know if you'll agree, but this is what the yogi said to me. I go, what do you think of psychedelics? And he goes, well, psychedelics are, if it's basically you're kicking down a wall and making a hole in the wall to get to where you're going, while meditation is building a door and walking through it. So I just thought that was an interesting analogy. Like it's because it's a very rough journey. Meditation, slower, longer. You might be able to get to the same place, but it might take years. Where psychedelics, man, you're going to rocket through that door, and it ain't going to be fun, and it's going to be a wild ass ride. I think that's what he was saying. Would you agree with that analogy?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
And in each their own, Alex. Like, for me, I'm a
sure.
type A guy. Like, I
Mhm.
free fall into countries under night vision. I kill bad guys, right? Like,
Uh,
my threshold is a little higher, what I
of
can endure,
course,
right?
of
So,
course.
but each their own, like, man, some
Agreed.
of my Navy friends, they don't do any of it. All they do is just read the Bible, and they do Bible study. And dude, they're getting better too. So I know, like, everybody has their own journey, you
Yes.
know.
Hmm.
But I
And
would
the
say
thing, go ahead, go
for
ahead, go
me,
ahead.
psychedelics, it was a rocket ship. So I can cruise around this old little Toyota, right, driving, or I can hit a Lamborghini and get there.
Go.
And to tell you the truth, I have some catching up to do, right? So I started my spiritual journey kind of late, so I have a lot of catching up to do.
No, and you're absolutely right. And that's why I kind of talk to everybody about every walk of life of philosophies and religions and spirituality from everywhere, because it's not a one size fits all. The
That's
Dalai
right.
Lama, said something so beautiful when they asked him. He's like, there was somebody who was going to become a Tibetan Buddhist and follow him, and he's like, no, I'm going to renounce my Judaism, and I'm going to go straight into the. He goes, no, 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 don't upset grandma. You have to take grandma's beliefs with you. You don't want to upset grandma. There's beauty there. Just because it works for me doesn't mean it'll work for you.
Right.
So you can bring that with you into this journey, but don't
Mhm.
get angry at it or reject it, because there's beauty even in that you now you repel against because you don't want it anymore because there's something new. It's all everyone has a walk of life, man. And
Everybody.
I everybody, and I always tell people, when people get really uppity about their religious beliefs sometimes, I'll go, listen, if you were been born in China, you might have been a Buddhist or a Confucius or a Taoist. And if you were born in Africa, you would have been following some other spiritual journey. If you were born in Australia, I mean, come on, there are all sorts of different paths, man. So just because that was the one that was programmed into you when you were 0 to 7, doesn't mean it's the one that you're going to finish with at the last 0 to 7 or 7 to 0, as they say.
Yeah. The psychedelic journey, I have healed my childhood. When I said I have met my childhood, I felt that emotion go through. I have cried like I was 7 years old. And I have saw past traumas, past lifetimes. When you release a trauma from a past lifetime, you get a visual of when you saw that. And I tell you, a lot was war, and it was ancient Asian wars, like the old wars. You know what I mean? Those were the images I saw. And I know, like, for me, I always been the warrior. And I in my journey is each person has their own breed, right? And a warrior, Kshatriya, is a warrior class. And I asked the shaman one time, I said, was I anything else besides this warrior? And he said to me, he said, I don't think you understand. It's like a breed of dog, like a German Shepherd, Pit Bull. You're warrior. And that's your karma. That's your dharma within this universe. You have to protect the Burma and fulfill the warrior class. And what is the warrior class? Like, what is it? Like, for me, I battle with this, because to me, warrior is, okay, I go and I take out bad people. That's not what it's about. Not anymore to me. To me, one sword keeps the other one in his sheath.
Explain
So
that.
as a warrior, right? As a warrior, I stop violence with violence. One warrior, one sword keeps the other sword in his sheath. So in this world of violence, who protects the innocent? Who would fight for the innocent? And it takes a special breed, I feel, and dharma. Like, what is your universal law in this life? Your soul, and those are the things I kind of came to conclude, in me and my spirituality, in my journey as a human being, is that I have responsibilities in this life, just like I have a responsibility in the military to do what I did. At this phase of my life, I have a responsibility to help others heal. If I've been through all this crap, right, and like, my 0 to 7 was shit, right, and my childhood was shit, and my whole military career was just war and violence. And then if I found God at that late in the game, and here's how I did it, we can all do it. We can all reprogram ourselves.
Amen, brother. Amen. And I want to clarify something. When you say you found God, what God are we speaking of? Is this the universal God? Is this a religious God? Is it the one with the white beard in the sky, or is it universal love? Because that's important, because when people say the word God, it's a loaded word now, unfortunately.
100%. Yeah.
It's such a loaded word. So I'd love for you to clarify that for people.
When I say God, and that's a universal name, so I say God, but to me, it's everything. God is an underlying intelligence in all things that governs all things. God is everything, and God is intelligent, and God is here within me and you and plants and every creation. That is God. God is everything. And God is not this bearded guy to me, okay? And everybody has their own beliefs. But for me, my God is not a God that punishes us. My God My God has guided me through life and helped me. And my God, yeah, I've been through a lot of crap, but I needed to go through that to be who I need to be in this lifetime, to fulfill my contract for my soul. Whatever that my soul decided to want to do in this lifetime, all right, man, let's do it. And at this phase of my life, that's spirituality is my God. And God's found within me. So look, each to our own, like I used to go to church,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe in community, I believe in that, but
Mm-hmm.
God can be, man, I worship God all the time and I talk to God all the time. I don't need to be at a place around a bunch of people I don't know, pretending to listen to somebody that, I don't
Mm-hmm.
even know. So that to me, if that answers your question, God is everything and God is intelligent and she, whatever, governs everything.
There's a lot of stigma out there for people, for the military, for people who are vets, people who've seen war, and a lot of people. And I've known a lot of soldiers. I've known a lot of Green Berets and SEALs, and spoken to them about their traumas and about what they did. And at least the ones I've spoken to are very similar to you. They wanted to help. They wanted to protect. That was their goal. What is the and one of the other reasons I wanted to bring you on the show is because, we have psychics, we have channelers, we have near-death experiencers. I don't think I've ever had on this show someone in the military who's gone through the path that you've gone through. And I wanted to bring you on to show people a different side of the military, because look, like in any organization, there's good and bad, always. But I wanted to show them not only a path of redemption of what you've gone through, but also a path of spirituality from someone who's gone through what you've gone through. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about vets, people in the military that did the work that you did and that are doing it right now in the world?
Some of the most intelligent people I ever met, seriously, is in the
Mhm.
military.
Mhm.
Very intelligent people, very go-getting, but the thing about the military is, man, if you're in war and you're around that, look, that's energy, right? And energy gets attached to you. And I believe in that now, right? Back then I didn't believe in it, but energy gets attached to you. And you go to some of the worst places in the world, like Bosnia and Sarajevo, they massacred hundreds and thousands of people
Mhm.
because they were just a different religion,
Mhm.
right? So, for me, that's the military sees all of that, and I don't, the thing about the military is when they get out, we don't have like a direction because we rely on the medical system that we're given in the military. And I tell you, Alex, they shove freaking pills down your throat.
Mhm.
You know, I was
Mhm.
part of that. Like I dumped it all, and I had to suffer from that. But that's the practice. It's getting better.
Mhm.
We don't have
It's good.
counselors. Like on a spec ops team, you think I could tell you like I'm going through PTSD. I'm facing some. No,
Yeah.
you are a national asset.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I say when you say what I want to say to people about the military is have compassion for them.
Yeah.
They've been through a
Absolutely.
lot. And some of them
Absolutely.
they don't even know they're in pain. They don't even know they're asleep. And if we can help them, why not?
You mentioned something, that energy sticks with you. I'm a fairly empathetic guy, so I feel energy all the time. I feel it when I meet people. I feel it in crowds. I feel it in public places. You seem to be a very empathetic person. I'm not sure if that's this version of you, but you naturally, I can sense that you have empathy in you. You had to have had empathy in you to do the work you did. I have to believe that. So I sense that in you. how did you protect yourself energetically, even when you didn't know, man, what was going on back then? Because to carry that energy of war with you, and not a year, not a tour, freaking 15 years of special ops tour, man, how did you just deal with energy? Is that what you brought back, and you had to have been cleansing it all these years through ayahuasca and through meditation and through all that work? Is that all that energy that you had to clear off?
I remember, Alex, I was living in trauma, right, as a
Right.
child, right? So I was
Right.
living in trauma. So this fed on to who I was. When I say that who I
Mm,
was that energy that attached to me at 3 years old. I was dying, like that racism and people spitting on me, and like what the world gave me, I gave back. It was just very precisioned, because of the war and special operation. It was utilized as a weapon. Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, he talked about it, where a government utilizes men right, to go to fight wars for politicians, right? And you see that played out. Like a lot of team guys, we have a lot of trauma. That's why we're like trying to prove ourselves, right? Trying to be tough guys, and look, some of these guys, man, they're badass warriors, but their whole life besides work. And that's where I was, like I was good at that one thing, but
right.
my whole life was my marriage, everything. Um, and I had to come to that realization at the end where, do you want to be this? Because I could continue down that road. They
Sure.
train us in the agency, right? We work with the agency and in the embassy. So it's naturally for us to progress into that.
Mm,
But that would have been a continuation of what? Wait, I'm going to fight wars all my whole life, and that was my route, until I felt anxieties. And I think like when we feel anxieties inside of us, when the nervous system gets taxed, man, I think that's God's calling us back home. There's a point where God calls you back to Him, and if the pain is that much, you get two decisions, right? You can go down this road, suicide and drugs and womenizing and whatever, or you can go down the path of God, right? And it was because of my pain and my anxieties and the depression is what led me to this. And I needed to feel that in order to be who I am today, to stand in front of thousands of people, to talk my pain, right? So they can have words of encouragement that they can go, wow, this guy's been through it. And he didn't start his spiritual journey like that old. And look how far he got. And this is the
yeah.
amount of trauma I faced. Okay, well, there's some kids that got abused, right? Neglected. They can take my word and that can
Right.
give them strength, right?
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. You know
Uh-oh.
those questions? Uh-oh, you know them. They're coming. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Man, living a fulfilled life is living by higher purpose, right? To be present, to be giving, right? Giving
Mhm.
and be present and to live a life of purpose. That's a fulfilled life to me.
If you had a chance to get into a DeLorean and go back in time, what advice would you give little two?
I gave advice a little too before, you know,
Okay.
when when one of my loved ones called me an idiot when I was 7 years old, and that really hurt me bad.
Mhm.
Academically, it hurt me, and to later on when I went to college and graduated with honors. But it really hurt me at that age when somebody called you that degrading name. And I went back to him at that age, uh, and I told myself that, man, look at us now. We did it. We went back. We fought for the people that we came from. Yeah, we had hard times, but we grew. And look at us now. And I love you.
Beautiful, bro. Beautiful. What is love?
Oh man, love is truth. That's the only truth. in the universe. Love. God, the creator, made everything out of love. And there's no other vibration but that. We focus on the lower vibration. That's the highest frequency in the universe that created all things.
What does world peace look like to you?
And if I pray for world peace, um, all these wars that's going on right now,
Mm-hmm.
a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
But don't we need to go through the darkness like the lotus flower? Doesn't it need to grow through the darkness to find the light? Didn't I have to go through to find a light? Now, this world and all the wars is we need to raise our level of consciousness universally together.
Mm-hmm.
Not just you and me,
Mm-hmm.
right? The world, and you're doing it, right? With your show. We're doing it
Trying,
today.
bro.
We're doing it.
Yes.
You are doing it. And we're doing it today, right? So we're raising our level of consciousness. And I think that's what we're here to do, right? In the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
To learn. To learn. Like we're here on Earth, we're on, I feel. How boring would our soul be? Like our soul would be so bored. We come here and it's just love. There's love in the afterlife, right? Like, don't we want to play some novels? Like, don't we want to kick in some doors and shoot some stuff, like be some bad guys, or right? Don't we want a life of action? And I feel like Earth is that. It's a battlefield. It's a battlefield for us to come here and learn whatever lesson your soul's here to learn. I feel my lesson, because everything is war, my lesson was love in this lifetime. Love for myself and love for others after seeing all the shit.
That's, I mean, that's so beautiful, bro. And literally you talk about Earth as kind of like a battlefield and a video game in many ways. It's kind of like a giant simulation.
Absolutely.
We've talked about that. And
Warzone.
you have literally turned into a video game character in Call of Duty. So
Yes.
that, you've come full circle, brother.
I want to share this with you, Alex. I was
Please, man.
talking to my friend and he goes, dude, you're Ronin, like Call of Duty. What's that feel like? I said, really, this is what it feels like. At 9 years old, I found the Bushido code and I wanted to be a ninja, right? And the two G.I. Joe characters that I love was Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. Like that was my guys.
Absolutely. Snake Eyes, dude. Snake Eyes.
Oh,
dude.
And I said,
dude.
and somehow I became this ninja on Call of Duty. So I'm the modern day G.I. Joe. What's that mean? What's that mean? It gives me a platform to speak values to our youth. That's what it means. Like Bruce Lee, he was a martial artist, but he brought in Taoism. He talked about Confucius and stuff, and he's this movie star. And that was his platform to speak value to the world, right? So being a Bruce Lee fan, right? I grew up to Bruce Lee. He was my role model. Why not? I have this fame. Why not? Why not talk about God? Why not talk about being a better human in the path, right, of a warrior? So, that's what I really I find fulfilling about the video game. It's fun, being on a motion capture studio and killing people with swords and knives and all that. And it's fun acting. But in the end, you say, what is the most fulfilling thing about it is, man, I get to speak values to our youth.
Beautiful, man. And where can people find out more about you, get your book, and find out what you're doing in the world, man?
So please pre-order my book, The Way of Ronin. It comes out May 21st. It talks about everything we talked about, but very in depth about a lot of my traumas and how I healed myself, but also like purpose and how I found spirituality and that. So it's called The Way of Ronin. And I want to break it down, Bushido was the first written about Bushido was in the book Hakakura. And that was 100 years after war staging periods Japan, because they're trying to reflect on what it means to be a wartime samurai. These are peacetime samurais. During war staging periods, it was simply known as the way, right? And if you look at any religion, when you align yourself with God, that's the way. So the way ties into Bushido and the warrior path. And Ronin, I call myself Ronin after I got out because that was the most dishonorable thing I can think of, because I was samurai in my eyes. I served, the most powerful daimyo in the world, our president. I served 23 years, the most powerful person in the world, and the most powerful military force. A samurai is in service of. So when I got out, I wasn't lost in life and I hated myself. So I picked the worst thing I can find was Ronin. And somehow it became a video game character. It became real. But
That's awesome.
Ronin to me was my strength to walk alone. It was my strength to walk alone. And when I walked away from everybody, I heard the most important voice, which is my voice. I wasn't influenced by hate anymore, so because I seek the path of peace, that's all I see. So that's why I named my book The Way of Ronin. You can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Ronin Tactics. I'm on YouTube, Ronin Tactics, and Instagram, Ronin Tactics. You can find us on our website, www.ronintactics.com.
And I got to ask you one more question, brother. I asked this question a lot from near-death experiencers and channelers and things. You've been one way for so long in your life as a warrior, as this, and all your friends, your colleagues, you've seen the stuff, you've been in the mud, you've been in hell and back. Now you've come out and, you're talking about the way of Ronin, your story of trauma, but more importantly, you're also talking about spirituality. Spirituality and the military or the warrior, most of the time, and please correct me, I know when you get into the deeper levels, they actually are extremely together, very much like the Jedi are. That's,
I
very
like
much
that.
so.
Jedi, yes.
Yeah, it's very much like the Jedi is, the warrior is the warrior monk. They're both
That's
very
right.
much so. But a lot of your colleagues, I imagine, are not as on the spiritual path as you are. How was it when you came out of the closet, brother? When you came out of the spiritual closet and started talking publicly about this kind of stuff, how did you deal with the people around you? Or were they just completely open and said, man, good for you? Or did you lose friends? I always love finding that out because I've had to deal with that myself. So I'm curious how you had to deal with it.
I walked away from everything. Friendship,
And
teammates, everything. I walked away for years. I would say 3 years. I cocooned myself, and I went inside. I didn't want to hear any of my teammates. I don't want to hear anything you have to say about God, religion, spirituality. I have to hear it myself. So when I got out, I stepped away from them all. I only have one teammate that I even keep in contact with now because he's on the same journey as me. And unless you're on the same journey as me, I'll pray for you. If we're on separate journeys, I'll pray for you. I hope you find the top of the mountain, because like Masashi said, there's one route to the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain is heaven. So I had to step away.
Dude, it has been an honor and a pleasure talking to you, man. And I appreciate your bravery in speaking your truth and your empathy to help the world, because many people like you who've walked your path, they just shut themselves off, like you said, and you decided to fight through that and find the path that you're on. And I honor you for it, and I appreciate you for not only that, but for everything you've gone through to get to this point, my friend. So I appreciate you and everything you're doing to awaken this planet, man. So thank you.
I also want to say thank you, Alex. Like, you were man, I want to tell your fans this. You were one of the instrumental portions to help me, through my spiritual journey. When I say that is, you bring in Eastern philosophy, you bring in Western philosophy, you bring in the energetic field, you're right, a lot of things to dissect. And you really helped me, man. So I want to thank you. When I found out that was going to be your show, man, I was so happy, so happy.
So, brother, appreciate you, my friend. Thank you again.
Hi, arigato gozaimasu.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.